Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Stefan Spijkers. I'm co-founder of pimvendors.com, and I'm really excited to have you here on this, well, I wouldn't say first, but at least first in a while, Pim Vendors Academy session, a session where we, or I, will try and enlighten you on a certain topic, in this case, the 10 reasons your PIM implementation can fail. This is a slight departure from our normal events where we usually have 3 or 4 speakers first discussing their solution or demoing it actually, and then discussing it with me in a roundtable session. This is more of a, well, academy session where I talk about a topic, in this case, the 10 reasons a PIM can fail, and you can ask questions during the session. There's room for Q&A afterwards as well. Have a conversation with the people watching, listening, and joining us from all over. So feel free to use the chat on the right-hand side on YouTube and join the conversation if you have any questions or if there's anything unclear. I'll try to respond immediately because there's no one there's no time schedule or timeline that we're following. And I hope you enjoy the session of today. So let me share my screen and we'll head on right to the presentation. And by the way, I already mentioned it in the comments. If you are joining us late or if you're curious and have to maybe drop out sooner than you expected, there will be a recording of this session and we will be sharing that with everyone that is attending this session. So don't feel bad if you have to join, if you have to leave earlier, or don't feel bad if you joined later than expected. So without much further ado, let's head on over to the presentation. All right, so the top 10 reasons your PIM implementation can fail. And yes, it's a white paper, and we will also share this as a white paper afterwards with everyone. What are we going to cover today? We're going to discuss what is PIM, just a quick introduction. We're going to mention the top 10 reasons your PIM implementation can fail. We're going to dive deep into PIM purgatory and especially how to escape it. And we're going to discuss the key takeaways and next steps. So real quick, what is PIM? Defining product information management, that's what PIM stands for, and also the process of managing all that product data. So what is PIM? It is two things, really. It is the product data process of managing product data. So that means storing that data, maintaining the product data model, and then, of course, publishing the data to your downstream channels. So it is a process, but it is also the tool, the dedicated IT tool that you use to make that process as smooth and efficient and error-free as possible. So you see on the right-hand side as well, you see input sources here, you see the PIM in the middle. So information could come from your ERP, could come from images, videos, suppliers that supply you with product data. And then, of course, it can also go and be published to your downstream channels, internal channels like your e-com platform, an app, maybe a print catalog, and of course, the many, many marketplaces we have. But first, that product data model, the product really. What is the product data model? And we define it as a multi-layered data entity. What does that mean? There's a core, the master data, that contains the product number, the EAN or GTIN. It contains basic product data like dimensions, weights, stuff like that. And then around that core, there's a layer of rich product data, images, commercial descriptions, and then outside of that rich product data layer, there's actually a sort of outer layer in which interactions with other types of data happen. So that could be pricing and commercial, that could be customer interactions and reviews, and it could be relationships, upsells, spare parts, etc. That product data model is managed in the product data process. So what does that mean? How does that process work? Well, it starts with the onboarding of product data from various sources and then mapping, cleaning that data and mapping it to your own internal product data model. There's enrichment, so you need to make sure that you create the best possible version of that product. You want to have the richest possible product experience, and that all happens in the enrichment phase. That means adding images, adding translations, adding the relationships that we just discussed. And then when the product is ready, or at least ready enough, there might be a stage gate and you hit a publish button where it is published to all those internal and external platforms that happen downstream. That could be done automatically. It could be a CSV file that you export. It could be a vendor portal, really, where your customers can download data. It can be a combination of all those things. And that can be as sort of static as your own product data model, where your downstream customers have to basically map all their, have to map your data to their product data model. But it can also be that you have to map in that publication phase and have to map to your customers' data models, depending on your value chain and how powerful you are and what is expected in that value chain. On top of those core 3 elements of the product data process is a workflow, which is basically all the tools that we combine to make that process as transparent as possible. So that means different dashboards, stage gates, maybe custom processes for different categories, custom roles for different people. So your copywriter might have different levels of access than your photographer, than your admin, and of course different tools to make that whole process as efficient as possible. Well, how does that product data then flow through your whole organization and through your internal system? So what we see here on the right is I would say the standard organizational model where products are born in the ERP, your enterprise resource planning software, and then propagated throughout the different systems. So you see PIM, the product information management tool, of course. You see that the PIM interacts with the DAM, where all your assets are stored, and then downstream channels such as your internal e-com platform, marketplaces, any system that wants or needs product information is connected to your PIM. And then we see other data, and I mentioned specifically pricing, which in our opinion is best managed outside of your PIM. So yes, you can store pricing data in your PIM, but usually it is better to have a dedicated pricing tool or promotion tool, or actually manage those prices in your ERP. So what we see here is the standard model, but as I already mentioned, it can also originate in your PIM. So your product can also be born in your PIM, or maybe even in your product lifecycle management tool, or maybe in an Excel file. But in most organizations, you'll see that that process starts in the ERP, especially if you're a manufacturer, maybe even as a wholesaler, you'll start that product in the ERP. For retailers, especially those with very long tails, so the very large catalogs where maybe you don't get a lot of sales on that very long tail of products, you want to have the product start in the PIM, because all that extra information really slows your ERP down. So having hundreds and thousands of products in your ERP that might not actually be necessary to have there because, well, you're not selling them, or you haven't sold them, really slows it down. And in those cases, it might make a lot of sense to actually have your product be born in the PIM. But this is the standard flow. We then map that process, so the onboarding, enrichment, and then the publication or the output, to the different systems. So here on the left, you see the different input systems. So that could be your ERP, your product lifecycle management tool, other tools. Those go directly into your PIM, or maybe even into your MDM, your master data management tool, if you have to manage a complex product data model across organizations, maybe. In that tool, you do the onboarding. There might be some interactions with your DAM, your digital asset management tool, where your images are stored, your videos are stored, your manuals are stored, your bills of material is stored, from which it then goes into your PIM, if it isn't already, where it is further enriched and then published to the different channels. So that could be internal output channels, different departments, different apps, different e-commerce tools. It can also be outside of your organization, such as data pools, directly to the customer, or to marketplaces. And then usually outside of the PIM, or actually most of the case, inside the PIM, you have control and workflows. All right. Now with that short intro behind us, let's dive into the 10 reasons your PIM implementation can fail, or as I like to call it, how to prevent PIM purgatory. Now let's start with that. So what is that? What is the product data purgatory or the PIM purgatory? Well, I've made a nice graphical interpretation through ChatGPT or DALL-E, but basically you're in that purgatory if your current solution requires all kinds of workarounds, so duct tape, manual exports function normally. You're also there if your normal product data journey that we just discussed, so the onboarding, the enrichment, the publication, is not a normal smooth process, but it has large backlogs, it has delays, it has a lot of errors. If you happen to have those and experience those delays, you might be in PIM purgatory. And then, of course, managing that is great, but if you change, and managing a static database is great, but if you have to change, if changing an attribute or adding a text somewhere or updating the SEO description will break things. If you do the updates in system A and you have to manually update it in all the other systems, so system B, system C, system E, D, and E, all that manual work, you might recognize that, well, if you do, you could be in PIM purgatory. So how to prevent that? Well, if you have the wrong PIM, that might cause you to lose quite a lot of man hours of work. So I summarize it to 4 years of work lost, but if you happen to see the normal PIM lifecycle, you do 3 to 6 months to discover a new PIM, select the right one. You have an implementation period that is also 6 to maybe 18 months, might take longer, might be shorter. And then you'll be using that PIM for 5 to 8 years. You don't pick a PIM for the coming 2 or 3 years, or at least I don't recommend doing that. Picking a new PIM, picking maybe any new IT solution means you'll be stuck with it for the coming 5 to 8 years. And it makes sense to spend some time and invest some energy into picking the right solution, because if you don't, you'll get the chart that we see below. So yes, you'll spend 6 months on selecting a new PIM, but then getting it up and running will take, well, 12, 36, maybe you'll never get it running. Means a lot of rework, means a lot of time wasted, time spent in the PIM purgatory where no one is really using a tool. People are trying to find ways around the PIM. Updating attributes of products still takes longer. There's a lot of errors in all your product data, and you don't have a consistent product experience across the whole customer journey. And basically, you're in PIM purgatory. And that, depending on how much suffering your organization or your team can take, you'll be stuck in that for 12 to 18 months before, again, selecting a new PIM and starting the journey all over again. And in this case, hopefully, selecting the right PIM. I hope for you. So how do we get there? How do you get these problems, and how do you get to the PIM purgatory? Well, there's 3 main drivers of problems. So you have your people, and basically 3 different drivers behind that. So your team, your suppliers, and your customers. You have the processes, so selection process, the implementation process, and the usage process where things can go wrong. And of course, you can also just select the wrong PIM for you, right? So you could have the wrong budget in mind for the complexity of your organization. It could be the wrong fit. So you could have a PIM that is not the right fit for your organization. And it could be a PIM with, well, the wrong roadmap. So they might be building towards a different industry or focusing on a different vertical than the one you're in, which is basically means that you're stuck with the current product and won't see a lot or any updates that are relevant for you. So diving deeper in those people drivers, we have the misalignment of stakeholders. So for example, if the onboarding is not our concern, might be something that marketing says, you have misaligned stakeholders who try and find to solve different problems with that PIM. And listening only to one stakeholder or having only one stakeholder involved in the whole PIM selection process can lead to a wrong PIM being selected. It could be that you have the right stakeholders and have them all aligned on what is necessary, but you haven't discovered everything that is necessary. Maybe because you don't know that that is actually a thing that can happen inside a PIM in a dedicated product information management tool, or because you didn't dive deep enough, or you didn't involve them deep enough, or have them think about how they use their current solutions effectively, and then, or maybe their future ambitions, which then happens to lead to, for example, discovering after having selected a PIM that actually we need a connection to SAP or to your ERP. And it was a knockout criteria, but you just didn't discover it. Another problem driver could be previous misadventures. So many people might have some experience with PIM in different situations, maybe in a different organization, and that could lead to, well, I'm sorry, German PIMs, no offense, but it could be that they don't want another German PIM, or they don't want another PIM without a dedicated implementation company, or they want to have a selection of implementation partners to select from if they, well, lose one. Another reason that leads to failure is following the herd. So we see a lot of customers saying, hey, we have seen competitor A and B, they are using this solution. We also need this solution. And that could very well be the case. There's a reason that some PIMs have a vertical focus or an industry focus. And it might be that that PIM is actually good for your vertical. It could also be that your organization is simply too complex or too big for that solution, or that you have a slightly different orientation or want to solve more in your PIM solution than those competitors do. Every situation, every organization is unique, and their situation does not always translate that well to your own internal situation. It is a safe choice, right? So like nobody got fired for hiring McKinsey, or no one got fired for hiring or buying IBM back in the day. It is the safe choice, but we do see mistakes being made by going for the safe choice. And then not to forget burnout. So doing PIM in the daily operations and doing a PIM selection and a PIM implementation at the same time, that eats time, that causes stress. And it is a long process, as we just discovered, right? It takes 6 months to select one. It takes maybe a year to get it fully up and running. You need to have the time available during that whole time period. Not having that time leads to a lot of stress and leads to burnout. And we have seen PIM implementations fail because people in the client organization burn out during the whole process. So, well, second driver, process drivers. It could be that you have missed key requirements during the PIM selection, right? So it could be that IT selected this tool for us and that the department has not been involved in the whole PIM selection, leading to a PIM being selected that just hasn't got the right features. It could be that the PIM solution just doesn't match the business processes, right? You're trying to do things in the PIM that you cannot do in that PIM. You need a different PIM, or you need some custom rework to do it, which often is expensive and put on a backlog. Or you have a PIM solution that does too much, and it's basically a too complicated setup, or it has been implemented the wrong way. So you get solutions or comments like, oh no, I'm still exporting this to CSV and then manually uploading it to Shopify, for example. And then, of course, the PIM solution has not been implemented well as a driver. So your team hasn't been trained, or features are missing, where there's a backlog of months, many months, which has all kinds of feature requests from you, from your team, to really start using the PIM well. I mentioned this before, but PIM is a combination of tool and process. You need to have the team on board. They need to be trained on the tooling. And if the PIM is not implemented well, they don't know how the process works. They don't know how the tooling works. And well, you get a reason for PIM failure. And then the solution drivers, so the PIM solution drivers. Might be that you thought about the wrong budget and you have the wrong budget reserved. So maybe you have reserved 300 euros a month with just 3 man days for implementation, 3K for implementation. That might not be enough to get the PIM that you want. We've also seen some big PIMs increase their prices in the past year. You might want to reserve the right budget for PIM, and we have some interesting and free tools available to get the right budget in your organization. Having the wrong budget leads to the wrong choices. You could have a bad fitting PIM. So that could be like the image on the side, where you have a bad fitting PIM that has basically too much complexity and all kinds of features that you're not using. Or it could be a too small PIM, or a PIM focused on the wrong vertical or a different vertical, which then leads to a lot of custom development and a lot of rework. And then finally, yes, I promised 10, but I have 11, the roadmap. So it could be that your solution that you have selected has only a few developers working on the solution. That means that their progress is slow, just to be sure. It could also be that they have a roadmap going down have a large customer that is driving them down a different vertical, right? So that they're developing features that is for the food industry while you're in fashion. And yes, being in a different industry does mean you have different requirements. So that could be, and you need to make sure that the roadmap is also aligned, because you're not picking up PIM for, well, tomorrow. You're picking it for tomorrow and for 5, 7, 8 years in the future. So how do you escape PIM purgatory, or prevent going into hell? We have a solution called the solution blueprint. So when I asked ChatGPT to create an image of product data heaven, it came up with this. Don't look at the legs, you'll notice. But this is how it should work, not a dark scene where everyone falls into a large, deep trap. It should be like this, with a nice sun warming you while you're enriching your product data. You can get there with the solution blueprint, and it brings together your current situation and your ambitions in 4 key areas. So that means your people, your processes, how you're using PIM, your data, so your product data, but also maybe other kinds of data, and then the technology and how your current IT architecture looks and how your to-be architecture looks. But if you put it more bluntly, the solution blueprint is a selection of processes, people, and tools that will support your ambitions and help you get there. It has a roadmap. That roadmap has concrete user stories, concrete actions you can take to bring your as-is situation into your to-be situation. And it features all the risks and possible mitigations that help you get there. And finally, not unimportantly, it has cost estimates so that you make sure to budget the right budgets, not just for the PIM implementation, but also for the maintenance in the coming years while you're using a PIM. So how does a PIM solution blueprint fit into the PIM selection journey? The solution blueprint is basically built on a series of workshops that we have with stakeholders inside the organization, from different departments, from different levels, so both the strategic decision-making layer, but also the PIM users, right? So the actual users and the people that work in the PIM on a daily basis. And we then have a scenario workshop where we translate all the different learnings to use case scenarios, both now and in the future. And of course, during the whole process, we validate the learnings with you to get to the right blueprint. That feeds into the PIM selection process. So we then select the right PIM independently based on the requirements and the scenarios from the solution blueprint. And the selected PIM then uses both the solution blueprint and their own internal processes to get to the right implementation. And we actually support you during that implementation as well. So from a technical level, if you have any questions or issues, we can help you make sure that you stay on course, right? So that the right PIM is implemented the right way. So how does that look? And also, how does it look if you don't do it correctly? There's different scenarios and timelines. For example, with the solution blueprint, you get to a fully working PIM within, I would even say 6 to 18 months. It depends on the complexity. For a multinational organization, that might be more like 18 months. If it's a small, medium enterprise, it could be actually within 6 months that you have a working, well-implemented PIM. It really depends on the complexity. This is actually designed for a more complex organization. And I must admit that I grabbed this slide from a customer pitch. I've also combined that with a sort of normal PIM selection, where you see that yes, there is a scenario workshop, and you use that scenario workshop to get to the right PIM. But then the implementation company, the implementation partner of the PIM, will need to do their own analysis and design, which takes time and money, and then needs to start implementing and configuring that. And they might be, well, because they're so focused on that certain vendor, miss some of the subtleties of your organization, which means you'll have some rework later on. And then, of course, the one that we discussed previously, the botched PIM selection, or the PIM purgatory, where you get to, well, basically because you lose the stakeholder alignment, or you lose requirements during the discovery, so you don't discover them. You get a lot of rework, a lot of customization, and maybe you get a working PIM, right? But don't ask how you got there. And if you don't get there, you'll have a new PIM and a new PIM selection, and you're back at square one. So, key takeaways and next steps. So what to do right after this session. First might be to chart your PIM journey. So your product data journey, the different people that are involved, the different processes that are involved, the product data and other data that is involved, the technology landscape and how it all interacts. Chart it for yourselves. You might miss things, you might have questions, feel free to reach out to me, but this is where you start. And you do that both for your current organization, but also for your future organization. So make sure that you also take some time to think about your ambitions, the ambitions of the organization. Are you opening a new country? Are you going to translate all your products into 3 different languages? Are you going to be acquiring other companies, and do you need to make room for that? You need to create flexibility in your setup to basically absorb those organizations. That is something you need to think about when you're going to start your PIM journey. Then you map your learnings to the key scenarios. Actually involve the different stakeholders here as well. And then those key scenarios, those key use case scenarios, are going to be the input for your PIM selection. So don't ask your vendors to do a generic demo, but ask them to use your key scenarios and only demo those key scenarios. And of course, take this recording and white paper, print it out, and try and avoid the 11 reasons that your PIM implementation can fail. So next steps really depends on where you are in your PIM journey. So explore the articles and the free tools on our website. We offer an independent knowledge base. You can find all kinds of information on the impact of AI on product information management, to the different costs involved. And it's all independent info. So we're not pushing you towards one vendor or the other. You can view one of the recordings of our previous events. So we have a lot of events that we did with our vendors, with our partners. You can view them all on our YouTube channel, where you are right now. And we have both sort of more generic roundtables on, for example, internationalization, so cross-border, going cross-border, as well as the different lightning demos / roundtables on the topics we did in the last year. Those range from PIM and onboarding, PIM and AI, PIM and marketplaces. You'll find your way. If you want, you can also fill in our full scan. So that will get you a tailored shortlist with PIM solutions that match your current requirements. We'll then get in touch with you and see what next steps you could take, which could be a solution blueprint, of course, or you take the input and output from that full scan and go ahead on your own PIM selection journey. And we're always available to schedule a free call. This link in this document in the white paper that you'll get leads to a Calendly from Chris, but you can also always send me a private message on LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to discuss your PIM questions and challenges. And actually, I mean, you might not be on LinkedIn right now, but follow us on LinkedIn and you'll be updated on all the PIM-related news. 2 quick deep dives. So one is the full scan, leads to the top 5 best pitting PIM solutions. It is based on an independent algorithm, so it matches your requirements with the requirement database that we have from the 40 vendors on our platform. I think more than 40 even. We do that matching independently, and yes, it includes a free consultation either with me or with Chris, or that goes too quick. A free consultation with Chris or with me, or maybe a PIM expert for your geography or industry. And it takes roughly 10 to 20 minutes. So grab a coffee and follow the link. We have a cost calculator, so a free estimation of your PIM costs that usually includes, of course, the usage and the licensing, right? So that is something to keep in mind, but also the design and the implementation. And it gives a pretty good estimate, I dare say, within minutes. So you get costs not just sort of for the first year, but also for the following years, and you can actually create your own total cost of ownership structure with the cost calculator. And then if you have any questions, well, drop them in the chat. I have some time for Q&A. And of course, you're always free to send me a PM on LinkedIn, send me an email on this email address, or reach out to Chris, my co-founder, directly as well. All right. Which leaves me with this final slide. And I want to thank you for your time. There's still room for Q&A if you have any questions on your current PIM challenges, or maybe you're somewhere in that journey. Maybe you're stuck in PIM purgatory. I'd be happy to help you right now with any questions you might have. Or if you don't have any questions right now, or you're scared to put them out here publicly, I'm also available after this session to basically help you answer any questions you might have. Then I'll give you some minutes to jot down your questions. If you have missed anything from this session because you're joining late, and that is true, Chris. If you join us late, there is a recording available. This session is being recorded. You can watch the recording on this exact link after I've ended the session, and we'll also be sharing a slightly edited and cleaned up version with you afterward. Well, having said that, is there anyone with any questions on the PIM selection or the PIM implementation journey? Anyone want to share a horror story of PIM selection? I think I'm used to working in startups and scale-ups where there is no PIM and everyone is using Excel to manage all their product data, which is a sort of purgatory in and of itself. So, well, you just don't know that there is something like a PIM. It could always be worse than a PIM that works only for 50%, that is Excel, and using that to manage a database of, well, we did I think more than 50K products in Excel. It's not recommended, I would say. Well, since no one is stuck in PIM purgatory, or at least not now, feel free to send me a message afterwards. But I want to thank you for your time again, and I'm going to end this session. I hope to see you during one of our next events. We'll be doing quite a lot of events in the next year. So in Q1, we'll have a lot of interesting events lined up for you. This is the final session for this year. So I wish you a happy new year. And